Oh, okay, here we go. So people are going to start rolling in here. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. We're going to let people get signed into the webinar before we get started. Just in case you are not at the right webinar, this is the Housing North webinar titled Being at the Forefront of Michigan Housing Policy, Housing Michigan Coalition. And as we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping here. My name is Yarrow Brown. I'm with Housing North, and we're really excited to have 3 speakers here tonight. I just want to, or today, sorry, not tonight. I just want to remind you a few things that you can submit questions in the Q&A, and we are recording, and we will send a link to all of the participants after this. And if you can stick around towards the end, we have a couple links to sign up for the Housing Michigan Coalition, as well as the Homes for Our Future campaign. So I'll let a few more people sign on here before we get started. Kent, do you want to just go to the next slide? Thank you. So for those of you just joining us, this is the Housing Michigan Coalition webinar. Kent, can you go to the next slide? So for those of you who do not know Housing North, I just want to give a brief background, and then I will introduce our speakers today. We were organized in 2018 by a cross-sector group of regional housing partners. We're working to overcome the communications, policy, and financial barriers that stand in the way of housing solutions. And our founding partners are Rotary Charities of Traverse City, the Fry Foundation, and Networks Northwest. We're really excited to share with you this Housing Michigan Coalition. This is a culmination of a lot of work from the Housing North staff and partners on the webinar today, and those who are not here today. Policy is one of the 3 legs of our stool, and since we were formed more than 2 years ago, we work closely with partners on the state and local level to determine legislative priorities that would bring more housing to our region. We have 3 panelists here today, and I'm going to briefly introduce them, and they are going to speak later. First, we have Kent Wood from Borealis Strategic. Kent has over a decade of experience working in and around Michigan's legislative system. Prior to forming the government relations consulting firm, Borealis Strategic LLC in 2019, Kent was the government relations director and lead lobbyist for what is now called Traverse Connect. Kent's also working with Housing North as our policy advisor. We also have Ryan Kilpatrick. He's the executive director of Housing Next in Ottawa County. Ryan has extensive background in economic development, community design, and public finance. He previously worked for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, or MEDC, and is a certified planner and economic development finance professional. Welcome, Ryan. And we also have Josh Lunger, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs for the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce. As the Senior Director for the Chamber, Josh works to create a vibrant business climate by leading advocacy efforts on issues related to housing, environment, energy, transportation, and local government. Next slide, please, Ken. So before we get into the detail of the Housing Michigan Coalition, we wanted to share the need for both Northwest Michigan and West Michigan and across the state, since our conversations depend on the ability to communicate the need for housing. An early priority for Housing North was getting updated estimates on the housing demand. In early 2019, we partnered with Networks Northwest to facilitate a target market study that showed a demand of over 15,000 units over the next 5 years in our region. While this study was done before COVID, we anticipate the need to be even higher with more people out of work and facing eviction or displacement. These numbers are all broken down by community and are available on our website, both housingnorth.org and homesforourfuture.org. So I'm now going to turn it over to Ryan and Kent to talk about the need for housing in West Michigan and the state.
Thanks, Yarrow. So working across both Kent and Ottawa counties for the last several years and have conducted comprehensive housing needs assessments for both. And as you can see on your screen, we need an extraordinary amount of additional housing stock. Over the last 30 years, we've failed to build an adequate amount of supply at every price point. And so on the left, what you see there is more than 14,600 additional rental units needed by 2025, and more than 17,200 additional for sale units. But in West Michigan, one of the things we really want to focus on is ensuring that we're also addressing the number of households who are shelter or cost overburdened, meaning they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Our data shows that roughly 55% of renters are currently spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And then lastly, another really core area of focus for us is on equitable outcomes across racial categories. So as you can see there at the bottom, roughly 37% of Black households are homeowners, whereas 77% of white households are homeowners. In part of our work, we want to make sure that we're bringing those outcomes into parity with one another over time.
And thanks to our friends at the Home Builders Association of Michigan, what you can see on your screen here now is a breakdown of building permits that were requested for the years 2004 to 2020. You can certainly see the the really large numbers in 2004, 2005, even 2006, right before the recession. You can see the very extreme dip during the recession years, and then kind of the post-recession recovery years, 2012 and on. You can see kind of the slow, steady increase up. Other than really, you can see even in the years from 2017 to 2020, as demand has skyrocketed throughout the state, those permit numbers dropping each of those last 4 years. You can also see that we're not even close to those pre-recession years. Not even double of what those pre-recession years numbers are. That brings us to what we can predict for 2021. And again, our Home Builders Association is predicting just a little bit over 16,000 permits. Let me just go back real quick so you can see where we were the last couple of years. So a slight increase of a couple thousand or so over where we ended up in 2020, at least as of November 2020. But I want you to notice, though, especially the needs. These are based on Yarrow and Ryan's numbers for those needs in Northern Michigan and just West Michigan alone. You can see nearly half of those statewide permits that we're predicting for 2021 are needed in just Northern Michigan and West Michigan. That doesn't include the UP. That doesn't include the Saginaw Tri-County area. Doesn't include Kalamazoo or Lansing. And it certainly doesn't include the big behemoth, the Metro Detroit area as well. So hopefully this can kind of help set the table a little bit on the kind of numbers that we are looking at in this state in terms of where that need is at least in the Northern Michigan and West Michigan region, and what we're even looking at in terms of being able to meet that demand. So Josh, I'm gonna let you get into kind of how we all came together.
Well, thanks, Ken, and thank you all for joining us today. I think if you're here, you understand just how big of a priority addressing the continued housing shortages. And it's not, quickly realized as I was talking to folks, and the reason we formed this coalition is because it's not unique to West Michigan, it's not unique to Northwest Michigan, it's not even unique to Michigan, but I think as a area of growth, we've seen in West Michigan quite a bit of growth. You start to see the effects more rapidly, and you quickly realize we need to do something about it. And so we've, with our partners, who you'll see here on the next slide, and up to almost 30 total now, we've decided that we want to do something about it, right? And our focus is on what can we do this year. There's no easy solution. We're going to talk about that. But what can we get done this year? A lot of us are working locally. I know there's probably a ton of organizations on this call that are talking to local decision makers about what we can do locally, but there's some things that we can't do without extra tools or more support. And so our focus is also going to be on the state legislature. So our vision is that we are going to be an organization, a coalition of community, business, and government leaders looking to increase housing supply and affordability across the state. And obviously, the why is just the amazing outcomes that come with a healthier housing market. It's going to benefit everyone from a family with the low wage earners to those folks just entering the workforce. That supports business attraction, talent attraction, and retention, and improves equity outcomes across the state. So there's so many reasons that this can be a broad, nonpartisan community and business community aligned goal. So right now we're working with a bipartisan group of legislators from across Michigan in both the House and Senate. And we're focused again on tools, particularly for locally driven tools, not overly dictated, that we can use to support development and rehabilitation of housing supply. I think, one thing we've realized is we went to this coalition and to other groups, we said, send us your craziest or maybe not craziest ideas, maybe your simplest as well. We went through it and we tried to develop consensus around those. So our priority was of the ideas proposed, can everyone in this coalition be neutral or support? Obviously, what's really important for the Grand Rapids Chamber might not be quite as important for Housing North, but for the most part, we're going to align because we're trying to do similar outcomes and we can lend our support where it matters. And so we kind of settled on some principles and that helped us get to this part. And Kent's going to go through some of these ideas here in a minute, but really we wanted to focus on decisions being made at the local unit. We didn't want to send money to Lansing and hope that we get some of it back. We wanted to enable our local leaders to say, hey, we really have a gap. Look at the data we've got. And I'll use Kent County, for example. There's a huge peak demand for housing for those individuals and families earning between 80% and 120% of the area median income. We don't have any tools really that help us get there in some cases. So how do we extend current tools or develop new tools that could help address that gap? We're also looking at trying to encourage more employer support. We've got a lot of, obviously I'm here, right? And there's a lot of chambers and other associations involved in this. There's a lot of employer interest in supporting outcomes related to housing. How can we encourage and enhance that? And then in general, what can our state departments do to better increase outcomes? And so we're leaning on the resources we have through this coalition, the experts who have done this work for oftentimes decades or more to tell us the best ways to do this. And we're going to hopefully make a huge push here going into 2021.
And I just want to back up real quick here, Josh, too, to this in terms of this, also being something that we really had to, I don't want to say had to, but we really came together as a coalition, kind of these, understanding that we've got some shared challenges together, and I guess a shared set of facts too. It's like we all know that there are multiple reasons for these housing gaps. There's no one specific reason or outcome that we can put our fingers on and fix it all right now. So AKA there are no silver bullets, unfortunately, out there. And that goes for urban areas, rural areas, project sizes, you name it. And I think we also understood too that we need to, there's a number of changes that need to happen in order to change policy along the housing front. And those changes are, in policy, those changes are in attitudes, whether it's state legislator attitudes about some of this, whether it's, local unit of government attitudes, citizen attitudes, you name it. And then, we also have to be providing incentives on multiple fronts. That doesn't necessarily always have to mean a tax incentive, but I think as you see the numbers earlier and you see the demand that's out there, and then you see where where the state is at in meeting those demands, which is to say, not even close. We need to make sure that we have proper incentives out there for all stakeholders across the spectrum, whether you're a local unit of government, a state government, a government agent, a state agency, or developer, that you are properly incentivized to help this state and help our communities meet the housing challenges that exist in those particular communities. As Josh mentioned, it's going to be different community by community. And I think hopefully you'll see that the policy changes that we're looking at are sort of designed to help with that approach, where we're allowing more local decision making, or more incentives and more housing options on a community by community basis, knowing that the needs are different. As Josh also mentioned earlier, when the initial group of stakeholders for the coalition originally came together, Josh mentioned as kind of a first order of business, we said, okay, well, let's get everything out there on the table. Send us your, although I don't think we said wildest, Josh. I think it was more like, send us the stuff that's in a reasonably good position to go right now. Like we've got, we
got the full spectrum back though. It was good.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. But knowing that we needed to, at least as a group of 5 or 6 organizations, from statewide organizations to regional organizations, needed to all come together behind something. And what we were able to do was really kind of come up with a list of over a dozen, I want to say at least 16 at this point, policy ideas that this coalition is comfortable with moving forward together on. We were able to kind of break those down into 3 different kind of buckets, the different policy changes. Bucket number 1, of course, was the need to create more financing options out there. I think certainly all of these panelists here, will understand, or probably hear on a daily basis, the challenges that communities and developers have with financing the kinds of homes and rental developments that are needed in a particular community. I mean, we're all basically fighting for MSHDA's LIHTC program, and that's pretty much all we have out there right now. And so it was really really exciting to see this coalition come together and understand, and really without any problems say, yeah, we need to find, not only do we need to find different financing options for different levels of housing development, but we also need to make sure that the various stakeholders that exist in the housing support and the housing solution space, have tools available to their disposal. And you can see, just a few stakeholders that we need to consider right here. Everything from your local units of government to your large and small scale developers, to business owners, as Josh mentioned earlier. So I will show you just the list here of about 8 or so policy ideas on just the creating more financing options bucket. Okay, we're not going to. I know when we as panelists got together last week to kind of figure out our plan for the webinar, Josh, I think it was you that asked, how nerdy do we want to get in this? Luckily for you all, we're not going to get incredibly nerdy in it unless you send us that way during the question and answer portion of this. But I want to list out, though, some of the different options that we are looking at in terms of providing more financing options for our different stakeholders. It's everything from, looking at the homestead tax rate for long-term affordable housing and, properties as they're being developed, to allowing local units of government to work more directly with developers in their community without having to go through a MSHDA policy or a MSHDA financing program, to expanding current incentives that exist out there, like the neighborhood enterprise zone, to allow more local units of government and more developers and more areas of the state to participate in that. So what I'm going to slide through quickly right now, just so you can see, is some of the different stakeholders and where some of these different financing option policies fit in. So for example, our local units of government are certainly a huge, if not a major, stakeholder and potential stakeholder in solving housing challenges around the state. So we want to make sure that local units of government have more tools available at their disposal for solving housing challenges in their community, and making sure that they can do it based on what those housing needs are in their community. So certainly there are, quite a few ways here, including allowing them to work directly with developers on a payment in lieu of taxes agreement, again, without having to go through the a MISHDA tax credit for that. And I think one of the potential policy options here that could have a really huge impact is authorizing regional housing commissions or regional housing trust funds that would allow multiple units of government in a region to come together and not only chip in resources for housing development, but also have the ability to levy taxes or levy millages or have bonding authority. Again, this would allow local units of government on a greater regional level to have more resources that not only can come from their community, but that they are able to for sure divvy back out to their community, rather than hoping that you can get through the MISHDA LIHTC program with a couple of projects that'll get funded, or hoping for some funding from the State Housing Trust Fund to come to your region. Josh or Ryan, anything else that you want to add there on local units of government specifically?
Just maybe I didn't describe it all that well earlier, but there's kind of a common theme that these are targeted for affordable units, but the locals will decide what's affordable. So maybe Grand Rapids needs 80% AMI or less, and that's where the gap is. They can target the incentive to meet that gap, but also then say, but you're going to have it affordable for that period of time at this level. And it might be higher in Northern Michigan. It just depends on what the need is and what the developer can make happen with the incentive.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maximum control, really is what we're hoping for in terms of, how local units of government are able to tailor that or work with developers in their area to tackle specific problems.
Kent, there's a question in chat from Sakura I just thought might be appropriate to answer now. If there are ideas for more financing options prioritized by ease of acceptance or by other ways, if that's been considered.
Ryan, I'm going to steer to Ryan. I think he probably understands the purpose of that question at a deeper level than I do.
Yeah, so I think most people are probably gathering that these proposed options are essentially tools to offset costs on development rather than to replace potential revenue sources. And I have the impression that question is getting at what are some other revenue sources? What are some other actual financing sources that can fill the capital stack? And we're definitely having those conversations. I think that those are taller hurdles to clear. And so, as Josh mentioned earlier, we want to think through what can we get done this year, but also how do we begin to think about what are other sources of revenue that are politically feasible and acceptable that could potentially help to fill the capital stack going forward. Because these tools, as you're gathering, all fill kind of that workforce housing gap in typically the 60 to 120% AMI spectrum. But probably none of these tools solve for below 60% AMI yet, unless you've got a nonprofit partner or you've got a lot of patient capital at the local level. These will be great kind of addendum tools to that additional capital.
And then while Ryan's still unmuted, the next question was about the advantage of a regional housing commission or trust fund.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you my perspective, but I bet Yarrow actually has a better answer than I do. So we've got varying degrees of sophistication and varying degrees of initiative on a county by county basis. And so some counties are kind of ready to go on their own. They've got the infrastructure and the staff and all the support tools necessary. They just need that legislative enabling legislation. Other counties are kind of like, we struggle to get our Brownfield Redevelopment Authority together 3 times a year. Putting together a housing commission and a trust fund and all these other things seems like it's going to be really hard, and we don't have the expertise. but they may have a neighboring county or be part of a group of neighboring counties that all say, you know what, none of us can do this on our own, but with 3 or 4 counties together, we can get a lot more work done.
I think you answered that really well. I would have, I concur.
Okay.
Good. Let me just kind of roll through here. So, here certainly a lot of different options, hopefully, if you're a local unit of government. I don't know why I just put large scale developments, but I think, certainly, especially in if we're looking at Northern Michigan and even a lot of parts of West Michigan too, which are smaller communities, even, certainly a lot more rural communities where smaller and mid-sized developments are, probably the way to go in those communities and can often struggle to get financing. But, if you are a developer doing really any level of development, I think typically when, the kind of the mega developments around the state, those usually have a better cost benefit ratio, at least as far as the state is concerned, as far as MISTA and the MEDC are concerned. And so usually have a little easier time, Ryan can probably back me up here, but usually have a little easier time getting through the competitive landscape for MISTA tax credits. But if you're a developer wanting to look at smaller to mid-size, there are certainly hopefully going to be some different options for you, being able to work directly with the local unit of government that you want to develop in to secure a pilot or payment in lieu of tax agreement, to create and develop on a residential facility exemption, which would be a new type of program that we would be basing on the industrial facility, the existing industrial facilities exemption tax credit, which is, whereby simply a local unit of government creates a district in which they think that residential units or residential development is a good fit, and not only allows for easier processing of that development, but also a certain tax exemption up to I think typically in the industrial facilities exemption were between 5 and 12 years. And then certainly, as we mentioned before, hopefully having more locally raised or I should say regionally raised and regionally directed funds for developing this housing from regional housing trust funds. If you're a home builder, again, certainly opportunities for you as well to take advantage of rehabilitation, more ability to use the neighborhood enterprise zone, and allowing for a principal residence exemption on your property during the development stage of your house. And then I think, a key stakeholder that we all want to bring more into the mix, because, as certainly with my background too, having been at a chamber before and working on this issue a lot with Josh and the Grand Rapids folks, Josh, you could probably speak to how often you hear from your members, about the challenges that they're having with housing. I think it's kind of funny, the issues that you would hear 6, 7, 8 years ago from business owners about what was challenging them to now are just completely different.
And I'm sure it's similar in Northern Michigan as is in West Michigan, but employers are seeing this as a talent issue. We want to grow, but when you don't have accessible, desirable, and affordable housing, particularly for those kind of first or second jobs into the workforce or out of college, it becomes an issue. And it's part of the whole talent question that we've been facing as a state for some time. So with the employer housing tax credit, what we're trying to do is incentivize and kind of have the state support along with the employer, but the employer can make the investment because that's where the need is, versus the state trying to say, oh, we think the need's over here somewhere. No, the employer is going to kick off that by saying, I'm in this community and we need housing, so I'm going to offer, whether it's down payment assistance, if it's direct investment in a program or a project, it'll help match some of those dollars in a way to hopefully increase the amount of total spend that employers are doing on this issue.
Yeah, you nailed it, John. And certainly you're talking about that first bullet point that's right there, that employer-supported housing tax credit. And this is based on something that we know exists in Illinois, and so there was certainly a precedent for something like that. There has been a precedent for something like that, and as Josh kind of mentioned, but I'll just add a little bit to, this could be for employers that want to do everything from develop something for their employees or rehab something for their employees to something like like Josh mentioned, a down payment assistance, or even just a monthly stipend that comes in their biweekly or monthly paycheck. Or the idea is to just, again, incentivize businesses to get some skin in the game, or continue to have some skin in the game in terms of helping their employees find the kind of housing that they need to stay with their company, quite honestly, and stay in our regions or stay in our state. Okay, and then finally, and this one's kind of interesting too. We know that there are, rental properties or property owners that have multiple properties out there. And we know part of the challenge, at least in northern Michigan and areas of the state, I'm sure you guys probably see it in West Michigan too, in some of your more coastal areas, but just the incredible pressure that is out there for short-term rentals and vacation rentals. And we've heard from property owners over the years, who have said there's just, the economic scale right now is so far in favor of transitioning our properties to short-term units and rental units. We would like to keep our units in long-term affordable rental housing, but financially, it's so much better for us to go to short-term right now. And so we certainly want to keep that in mind too, that there are folks out there, there are property owners out there who do have units in that long-term affordable market, who want to keep those units in long-term affordable market, but just with the realities that exist out there towards that short-term rental market, making sure that they've got opportunity or proper incentive to keep those in the long-term market as well. And again, this isn't to force them to do that. We're certainly not offering any mandate that they would have to, but each property owner, we want to just balance that scale out so that they can have a legitimate economic conversations with themselves about whether they keep it in long term or put it into short term. Ryan and Josh, we haven't talked specifically about second property owners in specifics, so I don't know if this is a kind of a key topic that comes up down in the Grand Rapids or West Michigan area, but certainly something in northern Michigan that not just do we hear from employers about the need, but people that have multiple properties as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So even the limited number of tools that we have today that provide some kind of tax relief for naturally occurring affordable housing don't get down to that single family level. And roughly 60% of the rental product in West Michigan today is single family homes. And so when we start to figure out how do we better support those folks who are renting single family homes, there's no tools available. And a lot of those homes are owned by mom and pop landlords, right? It might be a guy who owns 3 or 4 or maybe 10 rental units as kind of a side business, and is doing his best to keep up with property maintenance, to keep up with operating expenses, and keep rents relatively low. But when he's paying, typically 48 mils on each one of those rental units, that's going to be roughly $4,500 a year just in taxes. And a smart landlord isn't going to just eat those costs. They have to pass them on to the tenant. The same is true, honestly, for some of our nonprofits. We've got a couple of nonprofits that have recently been gifted or inherited a whole portfolio of single family rentals. And nonprofits, when they rent those homes out, they become commercial property that is taxed at the traditional non-PRE rate. And so even though it's a nonprofit and it's their mission to make sure that those units are affordable, they're having to subsidize those units with other resources in order to keep them affordable, just to pay the taxes.
Josh, were you going to add something?
No, Ryan did it better. I just had an anecdote of someone, a business leader who came to me and was like, he wanted to buy a few units, small units, and keep them affordable. But what Ryan was saying is he realized quickly that he can't and even pay off his taxes, even if he's going for 0% profit. And it's a perfect example of, can we step in here and just fix a minor tweak and hopefully have an impact, statewide that supports better outcomes.
Oddly, this has been like an area of conversation that at least I've found some of our more conservative, especially fiscally conservative legislators have been able to latch on to this, and kind of, Ryan and Josh, your examples there about, just trying to keep a couple of units there, and, knowing that you just can't do what you need to do in order to rehab something or even keep it current and be able to pay off your taxes. For some reason, it just really seems to be an anecdote that they've been able to successfully grapple with, to the point where that first bullet point there, providing a principal residence exemption for long-term affordable housing units was something that we were able to get former Representative Tristan Cole, very fiscally conservative legislator by all accounts from Northern Michigan, to introduce that as legislation last term. We're not able to get it through before the end of the year, so that's why it's on our to-do list for this coming year. But I think does speak to the opportunity that we've got out there to at least through all the talking about the different stakeholders across the spectrum that are impacted by this. I think we'll be able to cobble together a bipartisan, bicameral coalition of not only stakeholders but legislators that will be able to move this along. Okay, so with that, Josh, let's move on to bucket 2 really quickly, where we.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I want to make sure we leave time for questions. I'm sure there's a lot of good ones. So we're also looking at regulatory changes. A lot of these are also kind of get nerdy quick, and I say that in a loving way.
Very loving.
But some of them are simple, like just requiring expedited review of housing development plans. So can we ask locals, whoever the authority is, to put that at the front of the line, so that we're not sitting on projects longer than we need be. Discouraging ordinances that prohibit techniques or products allowed under state code. There's a few crazy examples I've heard. That's something that home builders have pointed out as a need. There's a duplicative review for modular housing. And I know modular housing is something that probably a lot of folks talking about affordable housing have heard discussed recently. You kind of find a way to cut down on the overall cost of it, but why are we spending time holding things up in a regulatory side? And then the last two have to do with the State Construction Code Commission. One of them I know is important for not just the developers, but also the folks that inspect and approve and do the planning. And that's allowing the State Construction Code staff, the Bureau of Construction Code, to just have informal discussions on advice over code interpretations. Right now, you have to go through a legal process. It was a change maybe 4 or 5 years ago where they said that's like illegal informal advice, and they shut it down. But for decades, there's always been that ability to discuss and make sure that people were following code and the intent of code. And then last, just kind of going back to the old style of code promulgation, and not that old, like 4 years ago, where there's more inspectors, more folks that are very knowledgeable on mechanical, electrical, and other systems within home building that are in the process from the get-go whenever a new construction code comes down. As of right now, there's only like 2 staff people in the entire state rushing this code through, and it hasn't led to the time savings that was the whole reason for changing the process near the end of the Snyder administration. So we're going to be advocating that they go back and get the various experts involved so that we don't make mistakes and have to go back and fix it later.
And then our really third and final bucket is, really dealing with the administration and making sure that we can get not only the support of the administration, but I think that critical top-down support from the governor to not only her staff but department staff as well to figure out figure out ways that they can align the work of state agencies, especially all the different state agencies that might come in contact with some kind of a housing issue, that they're working in concert with trying to not only solve these issues, but be a part of creating the solutions. And I know a big part of that is making sure that there is cooperation among, certainly there's a handful of state agencies that would deal with and interact on housing developments of all size, whether it's from MISHDA to MEDC. And I know, Ryan, you might, I think you might have some things to add here in that you have previously worked for MEDC. I think you're the only one on this panel that has worked within the state agency before. And maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that, that cooperation, or, what we have in front of us in terms of trying to get these state agencies to come together. I'll say, we've seen it before. We've seen this governor and governors past, call for, commissions and various strategies and strategic plans to get their state agencies all behind and running in the same direction and in the same speed on a particular issue. And I think we want to ensure that that's happening from a housing standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's right, Kent. And I think a lot of the ways that the policy has been designed at both MISHDA and MEDC is as if we had created a Venn diagram where the two circles never actually overlap. Frankly, I think that was intentional in a lot of ways. When I was at MEDC, we had several projects where we tried to use both LIHTC and CRP, or LIHTC and Brownfield. And both agencies were very resistant to having two different pools of public funding in the same project. Because I think coming out of 2012 and the Michigan Business Tax Credit, the state really got burned on some past programs and was being overly cautious about putting too many public dollars into one project. But I think for a while there has been a lack of being able to see the forest for the trees. And so getting back to this idea that the MEDC is really focused on job creation and private investment. And that really hinges on the ability for employers to attract talent and for that talent to have a place to live. And in order for that talent to have a place to live, we've got to have housing, and the housing needs to be supported by MISHDA, right? So we've got to help paint that picture and show how these tools can be used simultaneously and paired with one another. And also create some review mechanisms that ensure that, similar to the old MBT, we're not going to over incentivize deals, right? We're not just going to give away a bunch of tax credits because we can. These deals are still going to be vetted by professionals who know what they're doing. I have a lot of respect for all of the staff at both agencies. They're super smart people. But I think they've got to be given enough leeway to know when we've got a good project and to be able to use all of the tools at our disposal to get some of those projects across the finish line.
Yeah, well said. I think, for those on this, I think probably most are from Northern Michigan. I think we don't need to look any further than the Weyerhaeuser, the particle board facility over in Grayling. I think it was the only project in economic development and project in Northern Michigan that was able to use the Good Jobs for Michigan tax incentive. And almost from day one, they have had challenges finding the housing that they need to fully staff that company's expansion. in northern Michigan. You know, I know that they weren't blind to it. I know that they knew that was part of the challenge when they initially awarded that and began to develop that. But it's, you know, it's just such a glaring instance of, if you have a you know, if you have an economic development project of that size, and you know, which is really good for the region, don't get me wrong, you know, especially good for that Grayling area, but you've got to have housing. You got to make sure that housing is a major component of that, so that they don't find that they've spent millions of dollars to expand and develop, and then again, like I said, are not able to fully staff because you can't find housing in a rural area like that. So anyway, Ryan, I know you also had some, you know, really nice looking development pictures here. And I can't remember why, but I'm sure you have some kind of story behind them.
Yeah, well, since we've only got 15 minutes left, these were going to be some case studies that we walked through, like how do we think some of the tools that we've proposed could actually help real projects. I'm happy to talk through those if nobody has questions, but Yarrow, what do you think about opening it up to questions? And then if there's still time, I can talk through case studies. Otherwise, I want to make sure people have time to kind of poke and prod at what's been presented.
Yeah, so far there's just one question we haven't answered, but if people want to submit them, you know, now, either in the Q&A or the chat. One is about the employer-supported housing tax credit and whether or not this is a state rather than federal tax credit, and if there are any state reps or senators backing this idea. So that is the one question that hasn't been answered yet.
Yeah, good question. You know, the way it's proposed right now is that would be a state tax incentive. You know, basically it would be a credit on that business's income tax based on you know, how much of a contribution or how much they spent on housing for their employees over the course of the year. And you know, Josh, I know, I think you've found a couple, at least one legislator in the West Michigan area that is very interested in something like that. I know at least has been interested in helping us get that bill in draft form. But you know, there is absolutely interest out there. I don't know if you've got anything further to add, Josh.
No, I think you covered it.
So hopefully that helps to somewhat answer the question. But you know, on most of these, you know, as you can probably detect, but for those of you that can't, some of these are going to fall clearly into the category of needing legislation, where we will have, you know, legislators introduce bills on these and move them forward through our standard legislative process. Some of these are going to be issues that either can't have or won't require legislation, and that we will likely be working with the governor and her administration to take action on some of those. But you know, I think most of all the ones that need legislation right now we have in draft form. In our Josh, I would say we're pretty close to having sponsors for all of those bills too. Maybe not quite.
I think we have more sponsors than we do bills, but we need to finalize a few bills with who the sponsor will be, and then just get everyone up to speed. Obviously, this is, you know, technical information, and the sponsors need to feel comfortable. They need to know what other bills we're working on, and we're just kind of clarifying. There's always going to be some drafting issues when you're taking an idea and giving it to a lawyer to turn into a draft law. And so we're working through those, making sure there's no unintended consequences as we're working to address this need. But I think by hopefully the end of next week, Kent, we'll have drafts of every one of our ideas. There's just a few holdups left.
That's a good problem to have. We've got more people that want to attend the party than we've got invites, right? So
there is one more question, and I don't know that I can answer this, but is if land bank authorities have played a critical role in facilitating affordable housing, have we engaged land banks in Michigan on policy priorities or identified them as an important component in the effort of the coalition?
So I'll speak for our one land bank that's left. Yes, we have included the Ottawa County Land Bank Authority, and actually the the last image from the previous slide is an image of a development that we've put together with the Ottawa County Land Bank Authority and the Grand Haven Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, where we're creating a new single family neighborhood. We're pricing homes between $140,000 and $180,000 for income qualified home buyers. And we're using Brownfield TIF to reimburse the cost of infrastructure and to reimburse the cost of sale. So the land bank was a critical player in order to make the property eligible and to be able to reimburse that cost of sale line item in the eligible expenses. And so our county land bank authority has been involved quite a bit. I've talked a little bit with Jeff Sykes, or not Jeff Sykes, Jim Tischler at the Michigan Land Bank, but I don't know, Josh or Kent, if the legislative package has been shared with everybody at the land bank or not.
I will say that staff at the Land Bank Authority has been very helpful in providing feedback, and I think some of the ideas, in here are informed by some of the great feedback that we've had, at least from State Land Bank Authority. And I would say also on that that concept of the regional housing commissions or regional housing trust funds, part of that idea too comes with the idea that they would be able to provide that funding source or be able to seamlessly work with local land banks and maybe even the state land bank as well, to help develop some of those properties that exist in the land bank.
And I will just say that in our 10 county region, we have 7 land banks, so 3 counties do not have land banks, and we are working as best as we can with all of them on similar projects that Ryan mentioned. Some of them are in the works, but a lot of it, is just engaging them and, trying to keep some of these new ideas in the forefront and knowing that, what their capabilities are in our region. So we do have quite a few that are, active, and we do in Missaukee County just recently formed a land bank, and next week we'll be having a webinar about that, which I'll say at the end. We do have one more question, or actually 2 that came in. Emily Dorr is asking about the differentiation between missing middle housing types versus missing middle income and housing prices. So I don't know, Ryan, if you want to speak to that a little bit, but in meetings, they've been pushing the need for missing middle housing types and middle income ownership, and sort of what is.
Yeah, that's a perfect question. I think it's really important to talk about more. So a missing middle housing type is really a building typology. And it's a building type that hasn't been built very often in most neighborhoods since pre-World War II. So a lot of those pre-World War II neighborhoods that are kind of closer to your traditional downtowns have purpose-built 2-unit, 3-unit, 4-unit, sometimes 6 to 10 apartments in them. But those buildings look perfectly in character with kind of the architectural vernacular of the neighborhood. They're designed to be part of the community, and they don't stick out like a sore thumb. In fact, they add character and a lot of visual interest to the neighborhood. We have not built those in the last half century or more, primarily because we really reverted to prioritizing single family only zoning. I could go on a long diatribe about this, and I won't, but we have really failed to build any housing choice in a majority of neighborhoods because we've prioritized single family only at really the expense of folks who are earning less than median income in any particular county. So in terms of the middle income housing, the other thing that's happening across the state is the cost of construction has ballooned relative to the rate of wage increases. And it used to be relatively easy for a middle income household to afford a new single family home, right? I remember when my parents in the 90s were so excited because they were building their own home, their first home. And I think they paid like $120,000, right, for a new suburban house. Now the average cost of new construction is about $306,000 for a new single family home. In a lot of places, it's closer to $400,000 depending on fit and finish and square footage. And that's well outside of what is affordable to a middle income household. And so what's happening is middle income households, folks who are earning relatively median incomes, don't have housing choices where they can become homeowners because we can't build enough new stock to support the growing population. And the stock that exists today is spoken for. And when something comes on the market, it's sold in 7 days and they've gotten 3 offers above asking price. So there's all this competition for sale housing because there isn't enough supply. And we've really got to begin to solve for that middle income buyer who very often, honestly, may still be a single adult, or it could be a couple with no kids, where they don't necessarily need 3,000 square feet and a quarter-acre lot. They may be just as happy with a townhouse and a 20 by 40 foot backyard, but we're not allowing for those building typologies. So there's overlap between missing middle building typologies and middle income households, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Well
Thanks,
said.
Ryan. You know, I just wanted to point out too, real quick, Yarrow, that that question came from Emily Dorr, who was the director. You know, still somewhat new within her first 3 months, but as the executive director of the State Land Bank Authority, we were able to take some of her time last week on a Zoom conference call, and I had a fantastic call with her. So thank you not only for being here today, Emily, to show how invested you are, you know, in this and being part of Housing Solutions, but we had a great meeting, and I think we'll have a great partnership with you and the Land Bank Authority.
There is one more question to answer in the chat, which is also from Emily. It says the tax concession proposals are warranted. However, they carry the issue of what happens when the concession period ends and the increases in the tax burden can be subsequent, which is pending on the purchase or rental beneficiary households. Can you address this?
I can jump in a little bit, maybe Ryan can back me up, but you know, we're looking at where the peak demand is, and I've seen so many studies lately, and I'm glad that the research is being done. If we can really help, especially in these targeted areas, create tools that can help fill that gap, you're also going to remove, and we've got the data for Kent County, the step down impact, where I might earn 100% AMI, but if something becomes available at a cheaper level and it's not available at my desirable level, I'm going to go ahead and start driving up the cost for those lower affordable rates. If we can help support the supply at all price points, really is what we found, but particularly where the peak demand is at, where we don't have a ton of supply, we can create a healthier housing market, which yes, there will be, eventually these concessions run out, but we can't, there's really no way to lock it in other than let's try to do better in matching demand growth with supply growth so that all across all price points, we have options. Plus, I am a really big fan of what Ryan was talking about with, we need to get out there, especially, you know, I look around Kent County, we have a ton of great places. Urban Grand Rapids is amazing. Why don't we have more, you know, why isn't there more townhouses? Why isn't there more options for families at various price points and building typologies that could help, you know, create the vibrant communities that we all want to be part of? But Ryan, I think you had something you wanted to add on that.
Well, I would say some of these tools can be renewed. So not every one of these tools has to go away after the 10 or 12 or 15 year expiration date. It'll be up to the local unit to decide, do we still need that product and do we want to renew it? A lot of current incentives that are already on the books today are conditioned upon a certain level of investment in order to become eligible to receive that tool. Not all of these tools are conditioned upon a certain level of investment. It's more conditioned upon, are you serving the right income restricted buyer or renter? But where we do have a minimum investment threshold, typically for commercial property owners, there is roughly a 10 to 12 year time period at which you've got to make some new investments in the property in order to refresh it, in order to keep it up to date. And so typically every 10 to 15 years, 10 to 12 years, that property owner is going to have to put a couple grand into the house. And so what we want to be able to make sure of is that those investment thresholds aren't so high that they can't be met again every 12 or 15 years, but it's going to be up to the local unit to decide, is housing still really a major issue 12 years down the road? Or do they now, have we refocused on job creation or some other issue at that point?
Yeah, well said, Ryan. Certainly not an easy answer there. But I think I think that speaks to why we want as many of these as possible, at least those that are giving more options or another tool or financing mechanism to a local unit of government, or allowing them to work more directly with or together in terms of like a regional type of authority, to have as many options available to them where they can set the terms, the lengths, the investment threshold, the AMI, all of that stuff. And so, they can ultimately be the ones deciding in that, after that 12 or 15 years has elapsed, what is the need still, kind of like you mentioned. Are we on to something different, or do we still need this? Do we need more AMI, or where are we at right now? Great. Anything else, Yarrow? Any other questions out there?
I don't see any. I mean, I think you guys are doing, we're doing good on time. We're right at 3 o'clock. So I don't know if we want to wrap up and.
Yeah, I want to, some of you might be thinking, this sounds fantastic. How do I get involved? And probably the easiest way for you to do that is right now, type this address into your browser. It's a very simple SurveyMonkey sign up that Josh and his team, we were grateful to have them put together. It just requires your name, your organization, if that's even relevant. You can be an individual and sign up, but name and email address are the key points that we need. And with that, you will receive. We are going to be sending out regular updates on how things are progressing with the coalition, opportunities to engage, whether it be through a press conference, or once these bills start moving, and certainly calls to action too once we get to that stage as well. I know we've got our first call update tomorrow that will be taking place, I think at 3 o'clock. But really, we've tried to keep it very simple. And I would say, and I know Josh will back me up on this, if there are things in here that you really support and others that you're unsure about, sign up, and you can be active on the ones that you are very supportive of, and not as active on the ones that you maybe don't care about as much. I think we're confident that we've got enough collectively in this coalition now that we've got coverage on all these issue areas, and just want to make sure that if there's an issue area that you are interested in, that you've got those opportunities to get engaged, and especially when it gets to the point where we've got bills moving through committee, votes happening, and hopefully at some point some bills sitting on the governor's desk as well. Josh, what else do you have to add to that?
Nothing. I just hope we can share the link in the follow-up. And then obviously if folks want to talk further or have ideas, this coalition we're not intending this to be our only items. There's going to be other ideas that come up over the course of the year. And we're going to continue to try to focus on consensus, things to get done. But we'd be happy to talk further, any one of us. And I'm sure Ryan would be too going forward. So reach out anytime.
And we didn't share bucket 4, but bucket 4 is an ever-growing list of issues that we either just didn't quite have consensus on for the moment, or maybe some issues that needed a little bit more work before we were ready to put those out there. But as we mentioned before, we really wanted to focus on things that we thought that we could get done this year, knowing that 2022 we're in another election year. But I think we certainly see phase 2 and beyond for a coalition like this.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you to all of our panelists. I know this was a lot of content in an hour, so do feel free to reach out for more detail. Just want to make And make sure you're aware of our Homes for Our Future campaign, which is really a public awareness campaign around housing and ways that the public, local governments, and other stakeholders can be a part and learn more. There's some toolkits, a communication toolkit, and a housing ready checklist. And you can sign up to be involved in the campaign on our website. So please reach out anytime to me or Kent if you have any questions. And then next week on the 24th, the same time, we are having a land bank partnership webinar where we'll be talking to Grand Traverse County, Emily Dorr, the executive director of the state land bank, and Misaki County that recently formed a land bank authority. So thank you again to everybody who attended, and our contact information is here. And we will send a follow-up email with a link to the recording and the contact of all the speakers. Thank you again.
Thank you.